Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar about etiquette in the workplace. My name is Ian Corley, and I'm a Global Product Manager at Cambridge Assessment English, looking after our BEC qualifications. Just before we start, I'd just like to give you a few pieces of information. The first thing is to mention that, as you may know, we've been running a series of these webinars. We did 2 of them last week, and we've got 3 more this week. For people who are able to attend all the webinars, you will receive a certificate from us saying that you've attended the program. Other thing to mention today is that I'd be very grateful if during the presentation you could write any questions you have in the chat box, and then at the end of the presentation we should have 5 or 10 minutes where I will be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. So without any further ado, let's begin today's session. So, as I mentioned, today we're going to be looking at etiquette in the workplace. I'm going to start with going through some definitions of what business etiquette is, differences between business and social etiquette. Then we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about first impressions and how the way that we dress, the way that we introduce ourselves, and even the way that we shake hands with colleagues can affect the first impressions that we give. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we interact with colleagues, looking at both verbal, written, and non-verbal communication. And then I'll talk a little bit about different types of difficult colleagues that we might find in the workplace and how we can work with them. And then finally, I'm going to give you a little summary about the BEC exams that we deliver in India. But before we start, I'd like you to think about what is the most annoying habit that somebody in your family has. And to give you some ideas from my own experience. So things that I find really annoying are when people don't listen. Maybe they're just on their mobile phone and you're trying to talk to them and they're just sort of tapping away on the screen and you feel like you're not being listened to. I find that really annoying. Or it could be that when you're trying to describe something or you're trying to make your point, somebody keeps butting in and you're never able to finish your sentences. I also found that really annoying. And the third thing that always annoys me is when people are speaking very loudly on their phones. This could be at home or it could be at work, especially when you're trying to concentrate. It's very difficult to do so when people are speaking loudly. So those are just 3 examples that I've given you of behavior that I find annoying. And that brings us nicely onto the question, what is etiquette? What does it mean? Well, etiquette and manners play an important role in our everyday life. It's really the way that we interact with other people, and they can also affect the relationships that we have with people. If you come across as being rude or annoying, for example, that's going to affect the relationship you have. Whereas if you are someone who is very polite and respectful, you may well get that politeness and respect back from the people that you are dealing with. And generally, we like to work with people who are considerate and kind. And in fact, we like people who are considerate and kind in their daily life. And this really is the basis of what etiquette is. So you can see here that etiquette is defined as the set of rules or customs that control accepted behavior in society. And I think it's important for me to say at this point that, yes, of course, rules and customs change as we go around the world. The rules and customs that you have in India might be slightly different from the ones that you might see in the Far East, for example, or even in Europe. But that doesn't matter, because there are some rules and about respect and politeness that are universal. And it doesn't matter from which culture you come from and from which part of the world. There are some things which will always be treated as being respectful, and other things that you will do which will always be seen as rude. So it's important to bear in mind that there are certain cultural eccentricities that we have to consider in the different parts of the world where we live and work, but there are also universal rules, and these are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on in today's presentation. So let's move on. Now, you can see here on the screen that I've got some titles of some books here which are all about etiquette. And I think the question that I'd like you to consider as I'm talking is why proper etiquette is so important. It's quite interesting. You can see the title on the left-hand side of the screen here. It says, "You will never get a second chance to make a first impression." And I think that's really important because first impressions, and this is something we're going to talk about in detail a little bit later, are very important. People will judge you by the way that you act on that first time that you meet them. And so it's really important that you make a good first impression, because if somebody has a positive feeling about you the first time you meet them, then they will pass that message on, and you'll find that if you deal with them again, it's going to be much easier and you have that respect for each other. But the opposite is equally true. If you make a bad impression the first time you meet somebody, then the effect is even worse. You know, generally we tell more people bad news than we do tell people good news. And so it's really important that you make those good impressions. Here are some other phrases that you that are really interesting. Good manners never go out of style. And that's very true. And so, you know, I'm going to be talking a little bit today how the rules of etiquette have changed over the years, but it's still absolutely true that it doesn't matter. Good style and good manners never go out of style. And this last one is really interesting. It said, good manners open the closed doors. Bad manners close the open doors. This is a really interesting one. So if you can imagine, just by the way that you interact with people, the impression that you give to people, you can change people's minds. You can create a positive environment. And that's the idea of opening these closed doors. However, the same is true if people are warm and welcoming to you and you are disrespectful or rude, then certainly you'll find that those doors will shut. And once they're shut, it's very, very difficult to get them to open again. And just one more thing that I'd like to say. This is a nice slide. And basically, if we look, it says someone is always watching. You never know who's watching you and your etiquette. And what's important here is that you never know in an office environment who's watching you and who's remembering the way that you act. So it might be that you're talking to one set of colleagues at work, but there might be somebody else. There might be another director or another senior member of the team who's watching you and has an idea of how you're acting, how your manner is. So it's really important to always be respectful and on the best behavior at all times during your working life. So proper etiquette helps us to exhibit professionalism and impart a polished image. So basically what this means is that your colleagues will find you or have an impression that you are more professional if you're able to give that confident, respectful and polite image. And that's going to help you in your working life. A proper etiquette distinguishes you from others in a competitive market. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're at work, if you're polite, if you're thoughtful, if you're professional, then these are traits that your colleagues at work are going to remember. And it could be the case that further down the line, you'd like to apply for another job, you'd like to get a promotion, or you'd like to move into another department. And if people working in that department don't have a good impression of you, you're going to find it very difficult to get that job. And also, the final point here is that proper etiquette enables us to be confident in a variety of settings. So it goes back to this idea of having this professional image, this air of confidence. And if you have that, if you feel confident, and you're going to be able to work in a variety of different situations. You're going to feel more confident when you're making presentations, when you're talking to your senior managers at work, etc. So bear these in mind. So what I'd like you to think about now is the difference between social etiquette and business etiquette. And just so that we're clear on what the difference is between these two, when we're talking about social etiquette, we're talking about engaging with our friends and with our family. And this will generally be done outside of the work environment. And then when we're talking about business etiquette, we're thinking about the way that we work when we're at work on a day-to-day basis. So let's go and have a look now at some of the differences and between the two. So let's have a look at social etiquette first. So it says here that social etiquette is more likely to refer to informal situations, as we mentioned. Now this is interesting. It says that chivalry may be expected. So when I refer to chivalry, I refer to the polite and respectful way that we should have to each other. So for example, in a social situation, it might be perfectly acceptable for you to hold the door open for another colleague or friend, or if you're a man, to hold the door open for a woman. That's acceptable in a social environment, but we have to be more careful in a business environment, because remember that men and women are equal at work. Men and women are equal anyway, but at work it's important to bear this in mind. So things like being chivalrous and opening the door, etc., might be seen in the wrong way. And so you have to be very sensitive to the fact that social etiquette and business etiquette might not be exactly the same. You know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't hold the door open for a female colleague. I'm saying that you should hold the door open for all colleagues when you're at work. And then the third thing on social etiquette, which is quite interesting, age, social status, and relationship could influence the behavior. So what we mean here is that the way that you talk to friends who are the same age as you, or perhaps your brothers and sisters, may well be different from the way that you speak to your parents or your grandparents. So age does have play a factor here. Also, the relationship you have, I mentioned, the way that you talk to your brothers and sisters may well be different from the way that you speak to your grandparents. So it's important to bear these things in mind. This is less the case in the business environment, because you might find that there are people who are younger than you, who have a more senior position. That doesn't mean that you can speak to them as if you're their friend. You still need to give them the respect that they deserve for the position that they have. So thinking about business etiquette. So business etiquette dictates that all people are treated equally. So this goes back to the idea I had about chivalry and being careful here. Business etiquette is relatively gender neutral. I said that we have to be respectful to everyone. You know, the idea I gave to you about opening a door, making sure you open the door for everyone. But we need to play this, we need to be sensitive to the way that the office environment, the culture that you have where you work, and to understand and observe what is seen as being acceptable. And business etiquette is comparatively formal. As I mentioned before, the way that we talk to all our colleagues should be the same. We give people equal amount of respect, no matter what their position is within the company, their seniority, etc. So there are some important differences. I think it's very important for you to observe the environment that you work in at work, speak to colleagues and find out what's accepted and not before you make any try to use any of these techniques yourself. Okay. I mentioned that we're going to be looking at first impressions. And I said that first impressions are really important. And if you remember back to that quote earlier, you never get a second chance at first impressions. You want to leave people with a really good impression of you in their mind, so that they will think about you in a positive way. You know, remember what I said before, we all want to work with people who are polite and respectful, and we have to do our best to impart that image that we have to other people. Okay, so I found this slide really interesting, and it's really about thinking about formal and informal dress codes. And also, please, I'd like to let you know here that the pictures that you see, I haven't included anything related to traditional Indian dress. I've kept it just to look at kind of formal office wear. So things have changed a lot over the years in the way that we dress. So, for example, I could remember when I first started work 25 years ago, it was really important for me to wear a business suit and to have a tie on at all times. However, today I work in an environment where we have a dress down dress code, which means that most days when I go to work, I can wear what I like. I can wear, I generally choose to wear a smart pair of jeans and a shirt, as I am doing today, but I have that flexibility. However, in my office environment, we are still expected to dress appropriately when we have visitors coming from outside the organization. So if I know that I'm going to be presenting to a group of visitors who are representing a Ministry of Education from the country where they're visiting from, I would still wear that formal business suit and a tie. But I think this picture just really highlights to us that we can be flexible in the way that we dress these days. We still have to be careful that our dress would not be seen as being disrespectful in any way, but we do have more flexibility. But I'd just like you to think for a second as we look at this picture, just to think in your mind and in your situation where you are, what's acceptable for you in an office environment? What kind of clothes can you wear? And is it acceptable for you to wear those same clothes when you attend a job interview? Or would you dress differently? Well, let me give you an answer from my own experience. As I mentioned to you, we have a dress down code at work, so I can wear quite casual clothing. However, if I was going to be going for a job interview, just like the example I gave of making a presentation to important visitors, I would wear a business suit with a shirt and tie. Okay, let's move on. Now, it's really important for us when we make those first impressions, think about how we make those introductions in business. I mentioned that there are some cultural differences which we have to be respectful of, but there are some standard rules here. So first of all, if I'm going to be going into a room of people, and maybe there is myself and 2 or 3 of my other colleagues, the first thing that we would do is make sure that we introduce ourselves to everybody in the room, shake everybody's hand, and give a brief description of the work that we do. Doesn't matter what levels of seniority we have in the room. What's important, going back to the previous slide, is that everybody is treated equally. Everybody is introduced. You take the time to listen to the other parties in the room so that you understand their names and their positions as well. And of course, there will be an exchange of business cards as well. And it's really important how you handle this. In my experience, the best way to do this is always to give and receive the business card using 2 hands, as I'm showing you now. And when you receive the business card from the other person, take some time to read their name and read their position, and then acknowledge to them, you can do this with eye contact, acknowledge to them that you've understood and you've taken that card. And then what you can do, which I find is useful as well, if it's the first time that you've been introduced to people in the room, when you do have the opportunity to sit down, you can put the business cards on the table in an order so that you can remember who the 3 people or 4 people are. And then you can also write some notes in your pad just so that you remember who everybody's name is and what their position is. One more thing I should say is if you are in the room and people are going to be coming into the room, please always stand up to introduce yourself and to shake hands. And you'll notice if you are coming into a room and there's already people there, that they will do the same. So it's really important that you stand up to be respectful, you shake hands in an appropriate manner. We'll talk about handshakes a little bit later, and that you also introduce yourself and your colleagues fully. You smile, you acknowledge them, and you give your business cards and receive your business cards using both your hands. Okay, so I've just got a little chart, little activity for you to look at here. We've got some first parts of the sentence on the left-hand side of the screen, and then these are the second parts of the sentence, and they've all been jumbled up. So I want you to just take a little moment, just having a look at these, and I'll read them through for you. So we've got sentence number 1 starts with introduce yourself. The second one, introduce people in a group. Number 3, person of lesser status and authority is always introduced. Number 4, introduce other people with their. And number 5, always rise as a mark of. Okay. So let's go through these together. So the first one, introduce yourself, goes with B. Introduce yourself by stating your name, position, and purpose. Okay. Number 2, introduce people in a group before initiating conversation. So this is really important. I've been into business meetings before and had introductions where there's been somebody left out and we don't know who that person is in the room. It's embarrassing for the person, and it's also rude because everybody needs to know the name of everyone. It doesn't matter if they are a junior member of staff. They are given the same level of respect as everybody else in the room. Okay, and you must introduce everybody. All right. So, I think we did number 3, didn't we? Person of lesser status authority is always introduced to the person of higher status or authority. So this just reinforces what I said. It doesn't matter what your position is in the company. Everybody gets introduced in that business meeting. Number 4, introduce other people with their, and it's C, their full name and professional title. So you introduce your colleague, you give their full name, and you tell them who they are. And if you need to, you can also give them a brief description of what their job is, if it's not clear. And the 5th one, always rise as a mark of respect to seniors. So that's A. So as I mentioned, if you're in the room and people come in, always stand up to greet them. And if you're coming into the room, you will notice people stand up. It's really important that you always stand up as a mark of respect to each other. Okay, let's move on. So now I've got some statements, some questions. It's a little quiz. We're going to go through these together, and I'm going to give you the answers. So the first one, it says, the first person's name you say is always the most important person or the person of higher authority. Yeah, this is true. We should always say the most important person's name first. In business, rank and status are the primary determinants to who takes precedence over whom. Gender and age are not important. So that's what I said before. It doesn't matter what your gender is, if you're male or female. It doesn't matter how old you are, but it is important the level of seniority. And if you're coming to a meeting with your boss, it may be that you introduce your boss to the other members of the team. Okay, so the second statement. If you can't remember someone's name, don't attempt an introduction. No, this is absolutely false. Please never do this. You should always make an introduction. Everyone notices when you try to avoid it and will suspect that you can't remember the other person's name anyway. The best thing to do in this situation is to confess that you've had a loss of memory, sincerely and politely ask for forgiveness, and request the person to refresh your memory. And then I would write down their name. It's always better to do this. It's always better to be honest and say, I'm very sorry. I can't remember your name. Would you please remind me? It's much better to do this than to try and make some excuse or ignore them. Okay, let's look at the third one. When receiving a business card, you should always treat it as a gift. Take a moment to study the card and keep it with you carefully. Yeah, we've already talked about this. It's really important that you do this. It's really important that you take and receive the card with both your hands and to treat it as something that's important and to read the information. It's very disrespectful if you don't do that. Okay, we've got another couple of questions here. It says name tags are pinned on the left shoulder. Now, this is an interesting one. That's false, okay? Name tags should always be pinned on the right shoulder or on your right chest pocket. And there's a reason for that. That's because the eyes of the person who's looking at you always follow when you're shaking hands. So you're shaking your hand with your right hand, so their eyes will look here to your right shoulder, and that's where your name tag should be. So that's a really important tip for you. Try and remember that. So you always shake hands with your right hand, put your name tag on your right shoulder, on your right chest. And the last one, it says, in today's relaxed business environment, it is not necessary to ask your client's permission before using their first names. No, this is false. Okay, please don't do this. Now, it's true that in today's business world, we do generally talk to people using their first name, but that's only acceptable if somebody has introduced themselves by their first name. Okay, so if you're introduced to somebody as Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor, please refer to them using that title. If they say to you, okay, my name is, for example, Dr. Phillips, but please call me Susan, that's fine. Then you can refer to her as Susan. But if the lady or the gentleman doesn't do that, please always refer to them using their full name. Okay, great. So there's some interesting tips and hints for you to go through. Now, I mentioned that we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about handshakes. And handshakes are really, really important. And you'd be surprised how many people get it wrong. What advice I would give to you when you're thinking about handshakes is next time you watch the news, have a look at the politicians on the news and have a look at how they shake hands with each other. I'm not saying that they always do it in the correct way, but certainly you will see some examples of very confident handshakes. The idea with a handshake is it's a greeting. You want to tell the other person that you are a polite, friendly, professional, and respectful person when you shake their hand. That's the idea behind it. It's a way of breaking the ice and of beginning the communication with that other person. But it's a really, really important first impression that you will give. So let's have a look, first of all, at some pretty bad examples of handshakes. And I've tried to give each one of these handshakes a name. You may or may not have come across all of these, but let me explain them to you in a little bit more detail. So the first one that we've got here is called the pull-in. So if you've ever been in a situation where somebody has outstretched their arm, grabbed yours and pulled you in and shaken it ferociously, this is an example of a pull-in. It's not a great handshake to use, and it often gives the impression that you are trying to dominate the discussion by grabbing them and pulling them in and shaking their hand. It's a dominating handshake. It's not really a very good one to use. This one here, this is interesting. It's called the topper. You might have seen this one used quite a lot in if you like to watch American movies. And the idea here is that you come in on the top. So you don't shake hands like this. You come in with a hand on the top and the other person's hand is below and you pull it like this. The topper is always often used to show power and status. It's not necessarily a negative handshake, but it is quite a powerful one. And you often see this one used. I've seen politicians use this one a lot. This next one down here called the finger squeeze. So you can see, if you can see on the picture here, the two hands have not been grasped fully. The person has just squeezed the end of their fingers and they've squeezed them quite tightly. It might be quite a painful one. This one is a very negative handshake. It gives a very negative impression. It means that perhaps if the person is not interested in talking to you, or they don't value or respect you. Okay, so if anyone squeezes your fingers, it's a negative handshake. Please don't use this one. This one at the bottom. Now, I've seen this one an awful lot. We call it the bone crusher. And I'm sure you would have experienced somebody squeezing your hand very tightly when they shake your hand. Now, often we think that you should give a firm and a strong handshake. And that is true to a point, but you don't want to hurt the other person and you don't want to squeeze their hand so tight. So it's not a good idea to give somebody the hardest and the strongest handshake that you can. Okay, we need to be positive and confident and give a good strong handshake, but not something that's going to really hurt them. And again, that could be seen as someone who's being very dominating. This one over here is an interesting one. We call it the two-handed handshake, and you would have seen this one a lot. So you put your hand out first, and as you shake the other person's hand, you bring the other hand in as well. You will see politicians doing this a lot. It's a handshake. It's a positive handshake. It shows warmth. It shows sincerity. It shows familiarity. You wouldn't want to use this handshake all the time, and you wouldn't want to use it as a matter of course. But for example, if you've spent the day with some business colleagues and you've done a number of activities, maybe you've had lunch, it's been a nice day, and you want to show them that you feel warmth to them, you feel respect, etc. You might want to use this handshake, or you might want to use it at the end of a business deal. You've been negotiating for a business deal and you want to show that you're sincere and genuine. You might want to use this one. But do use it sparingly, okay? You shouldn't use this kind of double-handed handshake every time you shake somebody's hand. Okay, we've got a few more here. So we've got the palm pinch. You can see this is like the previous one with the finger squeeze, but actually it's even lighter. You probably only touch a couple of fingers. It's a weak handshake, and it shows that the other person is uncomfortable. We really shouldn't use a handshake like this. And the one that you can see on the right hand side here, the limp fish, is also something similar. It shows that you're disinterested. It's negative, so you shouldn't use that. A proper handshake, as you can see here, is both hands are joined together. You apply a little bit of pressure, but not much at all. Certainly nothing that the other person would find uncomfortable. They will reciprocate. The handshake should probably be 2 or 3 shakes long, and that's enough. Okay, it doesn't need to be any more than that. You will see from the other person as well their reaction to the way that you shake their hand. It's better to be brief and strong than it is to shake their hands feverishly for a long, long time. I'm often asked a question about kissing as well, because there are some, obviously in different parts of the world, there are different rules about this. For example, just to give you an example, if I go to Turkey on business, for example, it is perfectly acceptable for myself to receive a kiss on both cheeks from male colleagues in the office. This is just part of the culture. There are other parts of the world where it would not be deemed respectful to kiss a male or a female colleague. And again, what I do is I always play it by ear. I always go for the handshake. I never offer to kiss somebody's cheek unless I know that that is something, unless they ask me to do that, or otherwise I wouldn't do that at all. I would just have the handshake. But do bear in mind that there are different cultural norms around the world, and we need to observe and be respectful for those as well. Okay, let's move on. So we talked a little bit about what business etiquette is, the things that we should consider as important. We've looked at first impressions and handshakes, and now let's talk together a little bit more about how we interact with our colleagues. And the question is, what is communication? There are actually lots and lots of different ways that we can communicate with each other. Well, communication, of course, is the ability to express our thoughts and ideas, but it's also important that as part of communication, we listen to and interact with others in a positive way. Communication isn't just one thing. It goes back to that idea at the beginning when I said what really annoys me is when people don't listen or they butt in when you're trying to speak. Communication is a two-way thing. Okay. Communication can be verbal, as I'm speaking to you today. It can be written in the form of an email, a letter, a warning, etc. But there are also lots of non-formal ways that we communicate. We can communicate just using our eyes and our body language. And it's really important that we think about that, and we think about the ways of non-verbal communication as well as verbal communication can affect the impression that we give and how it can be seen in terms of business etiquette. So I've got this slide. We've got some different forms of non-verbal communication that we can look at together. So, for example, if you're talking with a colleague, if you're in a business meeting, maybe you're sitting around a desk at work, and you lean forward as you speak or as the other person speaks. This is good because it shows that you are interested in what they're saying. So it's very positive. Obviously, smiling is also really important, and it gives a positive impression, but we have to be a little bit careful with smiling. It's fine to smile to show that we're welcoming. It's fine to smile to show that we understand and we appreciate the other person. But if you were to smile all the way through a conversation with someone, they might be a little bit uneasy, especially if the conversation doesn't necessarily include a topic which is particularly interesting or funny. So use smiling sparingly. Don't do it all the time. That might be off-putting, but do it to show that you're warm and friendly and respectful for the other person. Okay, nodding, which is the movement of the head, is very similar to leaning forward. It shows that you're attentive and alert, that you're listening. Okay, you might even be nodding as you're taking some notes, and it just shows as a sign of respect that you're listening to the other person. Okay. Eye contact is important. It shows that you're focused and it shows that you're interested. Those of you who attended my previous webinar, which is all about presentation skills, I mentioned two techniques that you can use. If you feel uncomfortable looking directly in someone's eyes all the time, you can focus on a position between their eyes and just above, and you can move between their eyes and that position. Okay, still maintaining eye contact with them, but it means that you don't have to stare directly in their eyes at all times, which might be uncomfortable. Similar technique that you can do is move your eyes between their eye line and their mouth. So as they're speaking, you focus on their mouth and back to their eyes. Again, this shows that you are being respectful and that you're listening, but also it stops you from looking in their eyes all the time, which you might feel uncomfortable in doing. Some kinds of body language that we should try to avoid. Crossed arms and even crossed legs can be seen as being very defensive. Often we do this as a natural reaction, but please try not to. Sometimes, of course, in the office environment, you might feel more comfortable crossing your legs when you're talking, and that's fine. But make sure that you don't use crossed arms or crossed legs to show that you're annoyed or that you're in a defensive position. Fidgeting with your hands or tapping your feet or anything else that you might do when you fidget, tapping your pen on a piece of paper is not a good thing to do. It could show that you're nervous, or it could show that you're bored. It certainly isn't very respectful to the other people in the meeting room. Try not to do that. What you could do as well is that you could talk to your colleagues and ask them, is there anything that I do when I'm nervous or bored? Have you noticed that I do anything? Do I fidget? Do I fidget with my hands, my fingers? Other people might have a better idea of what you do than you do yourself. So please bear that in mind. Lack of eye contact can be seen as untrustworthy if you're always looking away or down. Okay, so bear that in mind. I know there are some cultural differences, but do try and, you know, at the very least, make some sort of contact for a short period of time. Also, leaning back, stretching your arms, it shows that you're bored. It shows that you're uncomfortable and doesn't leave a very good impression. So let's have a look here. Verbal communication. Let's have a look at the quote at the top. It says, if it transpires that there is a surfeit of applications for this post, we may have cause to invite assistance from another department. Okay, this is an example of using very long or uncommon words where it's not necessary. Always try and keep your messages simple. So a better example would be to say, if too many people apply, we may need help. Short and simple is always the best way. If somebody says something that you don't understand or you perhaps didn't hear very well, there are some important phrases that you can use to ask for clarification. You could say, excuse me, I don't understand. Could you repeat that, please, using different words? Okay, it's perfectly acceptable to say that. If somebody's talking to you in English and you don't understand what they've said, it's perfectly okay to say that. It's much better to say that than to say nothing and to misunderstand. You could say, could you put that more simply, please? Or can I just clarify that, please? Do you mean that you want me to? Okay. These are very polite. It's perfectly acceptable to ask for clarification, and please do so. It's much better to do that than just to stay quiet. Okay, just some other important things to summarize that you should think about in the workplace. Okay, the first thing, don't get into fights or arguments. I know that often in the workplace, we might have to deal with difficult subjects. We might be under pressure. We might not agree with decisions that colleagues have made. But it doesn't help anybody for that to turn into a fight or an argument. Okay, it's only going to make the situation worse. It's going to leave a bad impression of you. We should always try to be as diplomatic as possible. We should try to understand the other person's point of view. And there are different ways of dealing with differences of opinion than having a fight or an argument. Okay, it's always better to try to communicate fully with your colleagues, talk to your line manager, and prevent things from escalating to this stage. Also, these days we work in an open plan office environment, many of us, those of us not working at home currently. And so it's important that we're respectful to our colleagues around us. If you're going to be delivering a webinar, then try and take your laptop into another room so that you that they don't overhear you. If you want to have a meeting, don't do it at your colleague's desk. Go away to a quiet area. Be respectful of those around you. Okay, don't gossip at work. There are lots of things that go on at work. We'll hear things and stories about other colleagues, but be respectful, be respectful of other people's privacy. Okay, if you become a gossip at work, people will find out about that and they will always treat you as that. Okay, we don't want people to think that we are someone who can't be trusted with information and that gossips about our colleagues. Be respectful, don't engage in gossip. Okay. Respect the opinions of others. As I mentioned on a previous slide, we don't want to have any arguments at work. Everybody's opinion is valid. Just because it's different from yours doesn't mean that it's wrong. We can all learn from each other. We should respect each other and try to learn from things that people say. Okay. Also, be cordial. Basically, that means to be polite. Be cordial and polite to everybody in a work environment. Even if you find the relationship difficult, it's always better to be polite with our peers in an office environment. It's going to help the relationship and it's going to help you in your career. And then finally, we should also respect people's privacy. Okay, we all speak, we all have different levels of of privacy. Some people might be quite open with their opinions. They might be quite open talking about their private life. Other people will be the exact opposite of that. We need to be sensitive to the needs of others and to always respect their wishes if we want to have a good relationship at work. Okay, so we've just got a little checklist here. Let's just go through it. We've mentioned these points. Be softly spoken and cordial and polite. Don't get into fights and arguments. Be punctual. Don't be late, okay? Don't gossip or backbite behind your colleagues. Be productive at work. Don't spend lots of time chatting or distracting other people. Take the initiative wherever possible and consult with colleagues before making decisions. It's important that you do that. You might think that your idea is the best one and you want to take that decision, but talk to colleagues, be open about it, okay? There might be another way, a better way that you haven't considered. Get involved with working groups and working with others, okay? Be open to other people's opinions and suggestions. Be honest about your mistakes. This is a really important one, okay? It's always much better to be honest. If you've made a mistake, tell your line manager and tell them how you're going to rectify the mistake. And most importantly, make sure that you learn from that mistake so it doesn't happen again. We all make mistakes. That isn't the problem. Not learning from a mistake or being dishonest about it is a problem. Your line manager will respect you more for being honest about a problem than trying to hide it and then finding about it later. And then also, final point, make sure that your written communication, your emails, presentations, etc., are always clear and well explained. Okay, I've just got a few minutes left, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of advice about dealing with difficult colleagues. Okay, we're going to find people in our private and our working life that we find hard to get along with. We all try to get along with as many people as possible, and I would urge you to try and find a way to get on with everybody as well as you can. But there will be certain situations and certain types of people that you might find difficult. And I just wanted to make you aware of what these traits are. So the first one, the know-it-alls, we've called them here. These are people that will always have the right answer or always feel that they have the right answer. They might come across as being a little bit arrogant. They don't listen, and they might make you feel insecure. It's important to know that nobody knows everything, okay? And we can all learn from each other. But also, it's also a good idea if somebody is a know-it-all, find out what it is that they know. You know, how did they get that knowledge? Try to use it to your advantage, and if they really do have those knowledge and skills, learn from them. You'll also find people that are very passive. It might be difficult to get an opinion from them. Perhaps they don't stand up for themselves, or they certainly won't stand up for you. They're very quiet. They don't want to make presentations. Okay, this is also negative as well. It's important that you have an opinion at work. It's important that you know your work. It's important that you feel confident about what it is that you do, and that other people around you know that you're confident as well. So don't be passive in the workplace. And if there are people that are passive, it's important that you get them out of their shell and get them to work with you. You might find that you're working with a dictator, somebody who likes to order everybody around, but doesn't necessarily do a great deal of work themselves. They might rule by fear. They might shout a lot. Okay. Be careful of these people. Make sure that you always know exactly what it is that you have to do, that you understand what your job description is. Don't do their work for them. Make sure that you always have your work done on time so that you can prevent any difficulties. There are some people who we call yes people. They always say yes to everything you say or do, but they don't necessarily deliver on that. They don't get the work done, and their opinion might not be valuable because they always say yes. Okay, don't be this kind of person. You need to stand up for yourself. Okay, don't say yes when you think the answer is really no, and don't always take on work when it might not be your responsibility to do so, because if you get asked for your performance and you haven't completed that task, that's also very negative. And the same goes, of course, for no people. These are people who will always say no. They're always negative. Okay, you have to be wary of people like this. Don't buy into their negativity. Don't become like them, because then you will also be seen as being very negative as well. And then, of course, there are people who are always moaning, always finding something bad about what we do. These are called the gripers. And again, you don't want to end up being like this person. You want to be seen as positive in the workplace. Okay. So just to summarize, okay, etiquette varies across countries and industries. We've talked about this. However, there are some golden rules which you can use all over the world. And also, I told you that you must be observant and respectful of the rules in your particular company or your particular country. You need to be receptive to others, okay? If somebody offers you a warm handshake, give them a warm handshake back, okay? Just be as respectful to them as they are to you. Think of the other person and think about how the way that you would like to be treated, and treat them in that way. Keep your language simple. Don't confuse people. Use a good tone of voice and intonation. Come across as being, confident and professional, but also kind and considerate. Have that confident attitude, and don't be afraid to ask questions and get clarification. So, I'd like you to take a look at yourself now. What type of person are you? Well, do you think that you are a good communicator? Do you think that other people understand exactly what it is that you're trying to say to them? And do you think you would benefit socially and professionally if you improved your language and communication skills? Well, if the answer to any of those questions are yes, then you might want to consider taking one of the BEC qualifications, the Business English certificates, which are available all over in India and are recognized by literally thousands of employers as proof of your great English communication skills. BEC is supported. We have lots of fantastic resources that can help you as learners to prepare for it. And you can see here a great app which has been produced in India for BEC students to help them to prepare so that you can learn about not only the exam, but also your business communication skills as well, and how to be more confident in using English at work. Okay. So the BEC qualifications are recognized all over the world, and there are 3 levels depending on your level of English. Preliminary, which is a B1, which is kind of like an intermediate level. Vantage at B2, an upper intermediate level. And for those with really advanced English, we've got the higher level. You can see that there they are on the CFR. So when you prepare for BEC, you also learn about lots of really important business skills, just like we have done today. You learn about socializing and networking, how to attend meetings, giving presentations, writing reports, improving your telephone skills, problem solving, negotiation and decision making. So everything that you read and listen about in the exam is related to the world of work and business. And as you're preparing for the exam, you will learn about these important skills. Okay. And there are a number of reasons why you should consider taking something like BEC. Well, first of all, it's going to help you to build your English communication skills. It's definitely going to help you to enhance your CV. If a recruiter looks at 2 CVs, one has a BEC qualification and one doesn't, which candidate's going to be seen as being more attractive? Okay, taking BEC proves that you've got what it takes. It's difficult to pass an exam. You have to be really highly motivated. You've got to have drive and determination. And these are skills that employers are looking for. So I hope that you've enjoyed today's session. As I mentioned, there are lots of resources available on our website to help you to prepare for BEC. And I'm going to stop talking now and just give you a few minutes to go through some of the questions that you might have asked me. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today's session.